What's up guys, Victor here with yet a brand new video. I hope you're all doing well. With this video I just wanted to focus on and kind of do what happened to a video on one of the UFC's former fighters who happens to be making some big splashes wherever he does land. Now this fighter just happens to be the top MMA fighter in all of Canada, and he is Rory MacDonald. Now the thing about Rory MacDonald is that he was doing well to the UFC to the point where he got a title shot, and when things didn't go good, he decided to abandon ship and leave. Now, I don't know why, but it all basically just depends on what he wanted to do in his life and where he wanted his career to go to, which is completely understandable. But I just wanted to go over how he got to the top, how he fell a little bit, rose back to the top, and fell a little bit more. Now, it all started in 2009 where Rory signed with the UFC. With a 9-0 record. Now, during this time with the UFC, he was able to beat some very notable names such as Tyron Woodley, Damian Maia, BJ Penn, and Nate Diaz. He lost some very good opponents by the likes of Carlos Condit, Stephen Thompson, and Robbie Lawler. Now, Roy was able to make his way all the way to the top of the welterweight division by facing Robbie Lawler in a rematch for the UFC Welterweight Championship of the World. Sadly, he ended up losing that matchup via TKO in the 5th round, which just happened to be one of the best UFC title fights in the history of the promotion. After that TKO loss to Robbie Lawler, Rory fought Stephen Thompson, who just happened to be trending at the time in an upward fashion, with his karate style and his uniqueness. And Rory ended up losing that matchup too by unanimous decision. Now, after losing that matchup against Stephen Thompson, he decided to leave the UFC and sign with Bellator in 2016. Now, he ended up making a huge splash in Bellator as soon as he got there. He ended up fighting Paul Daly and defeated him. And after beating Paul Daly, he ended up getting a title shot against Douglas Lima, who was the welterweight champion for Bellator at that time. He ended up beating Douglas Lima by unanimous decision and getting the Bellator welterweight championship at the World. After that, he decided to set his eyes on the middleweight title and had a super fight with Gegard Mousasi. Now, things didn't go very well with that fight. He ended up losing in the second round it was the first or second round via TKO. He tried wrestling, and Rory ended up switching the positions on him and ended up finishing him via ground and pound. But this wasn't the end for Rory. He still had his title, so everything was still good. Now, after that fight, Bellator decided to have a welterweight Super Grand Prix, basically a tournament with some of the top names in the welterweight division fighting against one another for that welterweight championship of the world. Rory basically was a part of this competition because he was the champion, and he had to fight in the first round all the way up to the finals. Now, his first fight was against John Finch, and for some reason, the best Rory MacDonald, the Red King, didn't show up. He ended up fighting pretty sloppily. Sloppy. It is what it is. But he ended up fighting against John Finch, and it wasn't his prettiest performance. And that fight ended up being a draw, which meant that he still retained his championship. He wasn't kicked out of the tournament. After that fight, he fought Neiman Gracie, who was very undefeated at the time and a very good fighter at the time as well. And he ended up beating him in emphatic fashion by unanimous decision, and it wasn't even a close fight. So that basically set up a showdown in the finals with his arch nemesis in Bellator, Douglas Lima. He ended up losing that fight by unanimous decision. So as you guys can see, there's an upward trend and a downward trend, kind of like a roller coaster going up and down with Rory. He's doing good 1 minute, then he's doing bad the next, then he's doing good the next minute, and bad the next. So I really don't know where this all started. I believe it really started after that TK loss to Robbie Lawler back in the UFC, and it never really left him. But at least he was able to win a welterweight championship over with Bellator, who just happens to be the second best promotion in the world. Still doesn't really hold a candle next to the UFC, not even close by any matter at all. But being able to win a championship in another promotion is still very, very impressive. Now, when he did lose the belt to Douglas Lima in that rematch, that was basically it with Bellator. Bellator didn't really call him to get a contract extension done. They didn't really you weren't interested in Rory coming back. I guess they could have seen that upward and downward trend that I was just talking about happening with him, since he did have it with Bellator and he did have it with the UFC. So Rory was a free agent and decided that he'd sign with PFL in 2019. Now, it's going to be very interesting to see what Rory really does do in the PFL. The PFL isn't a slacker organization by any means necessary. It's a very unique organization. It used to be called the World Series of Fighting. Some very good fighters from the PFL have actually made a good transition into the UFC, such as Marlon Moraes and also Justin the Highlight Gaethje. Another notable fighter that I actually talked about from the PFL was David Branch, but he's not there anymore because he got caught juicing and he tested positive for it as well. So the UFC actually kicked him out. But David Branch was a double champion in that organization. But those were some notable fighters that made that transition from the PFL to the UFC and did have some have had some success and did have some success. So it's not the end of the road for Rory MacDonald, but it is kind of sad to see that he kind of is going through this trend. I do wish to see that he does have a lot of success with the PFL and he does win another championship, and hopefully he does make it back to the UFC. I feel like Dana will take him back any day of the week because Dana is just that type of guy that really does like to have talent all across the board, especially on his UFC roster. But other than that, that's all I really wanted to share about Rory MacDonald. I think he's still a really good competitor. He's still a really good fighter, and he's still a very intelligent being. I don't know where he's currently at with this camp. I don't know if he's still with TriStar or he might have left TriStar and gone with a different camp. But I know Rory is still a very good competitor and he can make some very good splashes. Since the PFL season hasn't started yet, I believe it's going to start up this summer. It looks like he's probably going to have his first fight in the PFL this summer in their welterweight tournament. So it'll be interesting to see what he does. Like I've said multiple times already, but I feel like he's going to make a pretty big splash, win a championship, and hopefully come back to the UFC and get that championship that he hadn't, that he came up short up against, against Robbie. And if he does win 3 different belts and 3 different organizations, then he can make his own history of his own. So I appreciate you guys for watching this video. I'll continue to keep on making some content and keep on giving you guys some good information about some fighters and some of the top news that's going on around the MMA world to this day, especially since we're all quarantined right now in this epidemic. So take it easy, guys. Stay safe, and I'll see you all soon.